Hey guys, once again here bringing on Dragon Ball Z Dokkan Battle video, and so today we are going to talk about part 2 Yellow Coin LRs. Well, I guess technically not all of them are part 2s, but they are Yellow Coin LRs. We are still waiting on any sort of news or info on the upcoming Yellow Coin LR that will be the part 2 for the STR Cell celebration. So I thought while we still wait, we could look back and I guess maybe we could look at this in two ways. We're either jinxing it or we're trying to get all of the bad energy out of the way ready for this part 2. We're going to look back at some of the worst Yellow Coin LRs to have released over the course of the Dokkan history, and that could be for a couple of different reasons, right? I made a tweet to get some recommendations. Obviously, I had a few of these in mind already, but a tweet to get some of these recommendations I posted in the Discord as well. And there was a couple of interesting ones actually mentioned that I wouldn't have thought of, and we will go over the reasonings for some of those. I don't necessarily agree wholly, but there definitely are some good points made, because the thing that I said in my post was the unit could be considered one of the worst Yellow Coin LRs released for a multitude of reasons, right? The unit could just be straight up bad, and obviously, you know, that's going to earn them a spot to get talked about straight away. Or the unit could have just been completely irrelevant to the part 1 unit, or completely irrelevant like in the meta, like even if they were good, they just didn't have a team or anything like that. And then obviously maybe the unit was good, but then immediately aged out like in the next celebration or something, right? So there's a couple of different reasons, and people gave some reasons for some of the ones that will be included. So we're going to go over those here in this video. If there are any that I didn't mention that you guys think should earn a place on this list, do let me know down below in the comments section who it is and why you think they should have been featured. So you can see we're starting off with AGL LR Super Buu on the screen. Obviously he was a disappointment, I guess, as the choice, because he was the part 2 LR for Kale, and of course was of no help to her whatsoever. I think technically he is on her team, right? Because I think one of her leader skills is Transformation Boost, which he is on, but obviously him not being a Universe 6 or Universe Survival Saga character, he wasn't of any help to her whatsoever when he released. And when he released, you know, we were still a little bit of a ways away for some big buffs for the Majin Power or Majin Buu Saga teams. So he didn't really have a great team. He also actually, I think at the time, was one of the few units that released around the time that he released where he didn't actually have a single 200% lead when he came out. Obviously that changed in the future, and funnily enough, even when we got like the first sort of Buu 200% leaders, this guy actually was somewhat usable at that point, because obviously against Buu Saga enemies he has guaranteed guard. Once he's got that leader skill and had all the Buu links active, like he was able to hit some like decent numbers. I think it was like, was it AGL 21 was his first like 200% lead? Because the thing is, on release, I think I liked him maybe a little bit more than some other people. Like even on a 170 team, he was still able to hit some okay numbers, but he obviously wasn't particularly great. Against a non-Buu Saga or Fused Fighter enemy, he only had a great chance to guard, which still 70%, but obviously he was an AoE character, and there's a couple of characters we'll mention on this list, but like AoE characters are not super relevant because we don't really get a lot of content with multiple enemies. Back when Super Battle Road and then Extreme Super Battle Road was kind of like the peak of difficult content, like, you know, during the Super Battle Road King Wars and all that kind of stuff, like an AoE LR would have been a great addition for some of those teams. But this guy kind of released when those events were already sort of even more so than they are now, right? Just on the cusp of not really being that challenging anymore. So obviously, whilst he would still be good for any Super Battle Road stage that he was on the categories for, those events were already at a point where they weren't like super difficult. So it's not like you were going out of your way to try and get this guy so that you had like this strong AoE character, right? So he's definitely not the worst offender on the list, but he is one that always gets brought up because he's the part 2 LR for Kale. And then funnily enough, of course, he was the April Part 2 LR for 2023. We also have the April LR for 2024, which, you know, we're off to a bad start, right? Because we're waiting for the April Part 2 LR for 2025. But the Ginyu Force, now these guys came out and they were at least somewhat relevant to the Part 1 unit, right, for Toppo because of the connection with Special Pose. But the problem with these guys is, you know, if you had Special Pose allies on the team, they would have guard, they get effective against all types, they get damage reduction before attacking, they have crit chance, like they're supporting Special Pose allies, like all of that stuff was good. They had a permanent buff active skill. However, the active skill, all allies are Ginyu Force starting from the 3rd turn, or all allies are Special Pose starting from the 5th turn. So you'd have to wait until turn 5 on like the Toppo team. And the problem with these guys is that, like, I was in that same situation because he wasn't a unit that I cared about too much. So I think I did a few summons and then just sort of stopped because it was before we had the pity system and everything. Like, I didn't get Toppo. So when these guys came out, it's like, actually, no, I think they did have the pity on global. But yeah, when these guys came out, well, these guys did. Toppo didn't, I mean. That's why I didn't bother going too crazy for him. But, like, I got these guys when they came out on global. And there was just no real team, like, to use them on. Because at the time, the remnants of the Ginyu Force, like AGL Ginyu was obviously really good on release. The STR, Guldo, and Raccoon stayed relevant for a while as, like, a tank for, like, Space Traveling Warriors and stuff like that. But they were outdated, essentially, by the time these guys came out. So realistically, their only real use when they released was to be a support unit on that Toppo team. And if you didn't have Toppo, or, you know, you just didn't want to run that particular team, then they really didn't have, like, a place anywhere. They weren't a terrible unit, like, their actual in-game performance, like, they were pretty decent, but they were just lacking a real clear, like, purpose or, like, team on their release, apart from that one specific Toppo team. And then depending on the build, there were options that were potentially better to go on the team with those other characters anyway. So these guys got mentioned, so I thought I'd give them a mention. I don't know if I would have put them on the list if they hadn't been mentioned by somebody else. But I think largely because of that, I think they were largely forgettable, right? And they aged out rather quickly as well, which I guess is partly because they're only on this, like, one specific team. So as soon as that team became harder to use, even if Toppo himself was still good, right, if some of the other key units on his team start to age out as well, and his team overall becomes basically unusable, then these guys who are only really good on that team, like, in part with that, go to being unusable, right? Now, next up, we've got one that we can all agree on, I'm sure, and this obviously hurts me, you guys know, as a Super 17 fan, but TEQ LR Super 17. Oof, this was a painful release. I remember waking up on the day where he was announced. It was one of those fun things where it's like loads of people had tagged me in the post, because obviously people know me as a Super 17 fan, and yeah, he was just incredibly disappointing on release. Very strange design for his, like, he's a GT bosses or androids leader. Like, androids leader, I guess, is fine, right? And then he wanted to have androids and target Goku allies in the same turn, which is fine for, like, the majority of some of the androids characters. And then he got damage reduction for 3 turns after receiving an attack after the end of the turn. I think at the time in the game, we already had units that when they got hit, they would then get a defensive buff, like, immediately. So if they got hit once, they get the buff. Then if they get hit a second time, they've obviously now got that buffed defense, whether it's just raw defense, whether it's damage reduction, whatever it may be. But this guy didn't get it until the end of the turn. So then on his next appearance, he would have extra attack and 17% damage reduction, which is a very odd choice. And then continuing the odd choices, I think he's the only unit in the game, potentially even still now, that when he receives an attack, he has a high chance of getting key +1 up to +7. Now, being an LR that didn't have, like, the craziest of key links, like, that means if you took a bunch of hits in the turn and that didn't proc, like you wouldn't be getting this extra ki. Whereas there were a bunch of LRs that were already in the game at the time when this guy came out that would get ki when they got hit. Even some TURs, which obviously is not as useful for them overall. But there were units in the game that just guaranteed got an extra ki when they received hits. Whereas for some reason this guy got a high chance. So a lot of the time it just wouldn't go off. And then on his like second or third appearance, he would still struggle for ki. Just really, really awkward. And of course, for timing as well, I think the worst thing about the timing of his release is not long after he came out, we got our first characters that could negate supers or absorb ki blast supers, right? Like we got the tech androids, and then we got the Jiro and 19 banner unit. And like this guy, like Super 17's whole deal is that he absorbs ki blasts, right? Like that's the whole thing of the character. And like we know now from stuff that we've heard over the years, like way later than this guy's release, because he came out in 2021, that this guy was like, they plan units months and months and months in advance. So if they had stuff on the books for absorbing supers, or even if it was just straight up negating, even if before absorbing was a thing, right? Because that would be perfect for this guy. He absorbs ki blasts, heals you. Even if he didn't have that, if he just negated ki blast supers, that would be something. And that stuff we know was already in the works, like already on the drawing board, if you will, because the units that came out not long after him then had those mechanics. So he missed out on those, I guess almost seemingly for no reason. I don't know why he did not get that kind of ability. Obviously we are waiting on this guy's EZA. He's one of the older LRs now that doesn't have one. So the problem is that absorbing a ki blast super or like negating a super requires like an extra animation. So he's not going to get the ability to absorb supers or anything. I guess there is the animation that exists for the STR one, but I don't think they've never done that in the past, right? Where they've given a unit an EZA and then added in an animation for them, even if it exists already on a different unit. I'm fairly sure. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. So the best we can hope for is, I guess, he gets a thing kind of like the TEQ Gotenks, where he just gets like, you know, 99% damage reduction against ki blast supers or something. But yeah, very unfortunate timing for this guy's release. He's just mid, like right from the jump, which is very unfortunate because like his animations are okay. Like if he'd been like, if his EZA is really good, then he'll be fun to use again. But yeah, he definitely fits the bill for this this video. Same with, we have next up the Part 2 LR for the physical Turles celebration, the INT Tree of Might Goku. So obviously, all jokes and memes aside about like base form Goku, because obviously there is that. This guy was just really not very good on release. Another one of these characters where he has an AoE, but released in a meta where AoE supers weren't really of any particular use. He would get extra ki if you were facing multiple enemies, but again, it wasn't really like a huge deal. He would get extra attack power against multiple enemies as well. He had the final blow mechanic, which has always been kind of dicey. He gave him extra ki and an extra attack boost. So I suppose it's not the end of the world if you didn't get it, because it's more so like units, it kind of becomes a death sentence if they're relying on some of these weirder abilities like Final Blow to get defense, and then they never get it. Whereas he just had the attack power. He didn't raise defense on his 12 ki, so any additionals or anything essentially weren't helping him out there either. He had an active skill, which activated when HP 59% or less from turn 3, or when facing one enemy from turn 5, and it just does like a big damage thing. But unlike a lot of characters that released at the time, like his active skill didn't even have the guaranteed crit for the turn, which would have at least helped him out a little bit, especially because then like the following AoE would have then been all crits across the board, which would have been useful in some of those occasions where the AoE super would be helpful. His link set wasn't particularly great, which I guess in part is because he is just a base form Goku. Just all in all, this guy on release was very, very unimpressive. Like, he was a character that he's not very good defensively, so realistically all he was on release, his role was to be a damage dealer, but he didn't have any sort of built-in crit. He doesn't have any way to build in additional. So even on some of his better turns, he would do like the one, I don't even want to say big, because I don't think he was meta busting in terms of attack power, but he would do his one like 18 key super like big attack stat, and then that would be it for the turn. And it wouldn't crit, you wouldn't get an additional, and then obviously he would get destroyed by super attacks. Just a very, very bad unit on release, unfortunately. Now, next up, apologies to our boy Bringer, but we do have Tapion and Minotia here. They got a mention. These guys came out as the Part 2 LR for Videl, which was already, like, you know, again, in line with, like, Super Buu. They don't really work with her. They weren't on her team because they're not on Defenders of Justice. Obviously, they're not a Peppy Gals or, like, Buu Saga or anything like that kind of character. Now, the thing is, they weren't terrible on release. Obviously they weren't like anything super crazy. They don't have any defense raising or anything on their super attack effects. They were supporting Storied Figures or Siblings Bond, which was kind of a weird team. Obviously that was their leader skill as well. Medium chance to launch an additional super at 18 key, and then for each super attack performed they get damage reduction within the turn. They had a really interesting active skill, removes all allies' negative effects, and then all allies key 3 and attack and defense 20% for 2 turns. This is a unit that I could see getting a really good easy A, and then becoming useful on some of these teams that they're on, like movie heroes. Well, I guess realistically, out of the categories they're on, that's the main one that is actually good. Because joined forces, I guess, is kind of going to fall to the wayside as we see more reversible exchange units. And then like Siblings Bond, I guess there are still some good units on there. Storied Figures and Legendary Existence are a bit dicey in terms of overall like category strength, but they are on movie heroes. And having this active skill, this can obviously remove things like rotation locking and characters being sealed. Like against some of these tough bosses, that will be really helpful. If their chance to additional super is increased, maybe they get like an extra one as well. Like building up damage reduction within the turn for each super can be pretty good. Obviously, again, that leaves you at the mercy of RNG. So if you get one super and then like an additional normal, they've only got 13% damage reduction. They didn't get defense on super. Like they were a unit that when they came out, they weren't particularly like, it wasn't like they were straight up terrible. They just didn't really have a place. And obviously the toughest bosses in the game would still lay into them like pretty badly. So these guys have the potential for a really good easy A. Minato and I talked about it a while back. It was like the beginning of the year, or like end of last year. We did a video going over predictions for all the Dokkan Fests for the year, and I think it would be cool to get a new Dokkan Fest Tapion, and then these guys getting an easy A. I think that could be really cool. These guys definitely have potential for a good easy A, but unfortunately on release they were just a little bit lost and, you know, aged out fairly quickly as well, unfortunately. So next up we have this guy, the STR Kaioken Goku from the 7th anniversary. We could mention the Vegeta as well. I think both of them were disliked on release. I think I maybe got more use out of the Vegeta just because he had the guard and the AoE. I think I used him in some like SBR stages or something. But both of these Part 2 LRs were not particularly great, not particularly well received. Obviously, this was the last time that the anniversary Part 2 LRs were yellow coin LRs. But yeah, this guy on release wasn't really anything special. He was a damage dealing unit, so like on his best turns he could do some solid damage, but obviously he wasn't very good defensively. And being a Kaioken Goku, it means he misses out on categories like Power Beyond Super Saiyan, and then all the different Super Saiyan categories, like if he was a Super Saiyan Goku. Obviously being like the release with the actual 7 years themselves, like when you think about like the gods, right, he's not a movie heroes character, he's not a Power Beyond Super Saiyan character, and then for the Super Saiyan 4s he's not a fused fighter, he's not a GT hero. Like he came out as this Part 2 LR, and at the time just kind of didn't really have a great spot. Like I say, the TEQ Vegeta as well, I think, but I figured for some of these guys that were like dual releases, I would just put the one that was probably the worst offender of the two like on the list. And like I say, I think I'd managed to get some use out of the TEQ Great 8 Vegeta at least, whereas this guy was just pretty bad across the board on release. I don't have a huge amount to say about him. Like I say, he wasn't in the best spot in terms of like teams and setups. He wasn't in the best spot in terms of how good he was in the meta compared to other options. And of course, the funny thing about that is that he then got an easy A that was kind of underwhelming as well. So very disappointing. Now, in terms of Anniversary Part 2 LRs, we did also get a mention for the Golden Frieza and 17. These guys, of course, got an easy A that then made them actually really, really good. But at the time when they released, I don't think I really saw anyone giving them any kind of praise. Like the Universe 6 team obviously became a big Universe 17 was like a big thing, the big focus of the 6th anniversary. And by the time we got to the end of the anniversary and all the units were out, all the ECAs and everything, like we had the Roshi, who still in history is probably one of the best free-to-play units on release and lasted for quite a long time in terms of before he aged out. Like, I don't know if these guys even necessarily made the optimal version of the Universe 17 by the end of the celebration. I think the Team Universe 7, the INT LR, was also not like super well received, but I think most people at the time, unless I'm completely misremembering, thought that the INT Team Universe 7 were better than these guys. So these guys did at least get some redemption with a good easy A, but they were pretty mid on release, unfortunately. And being Anniversary Part 2 LRs, I guess that does make it just that little bit more disappointing as well. Then we have this guy, the Goku and Piccolo. Now, I know some people out there liked this unit, did some shenanigans with this unit, but I have always hated this unit ever since their release. They got guard for the first few turns. They were stacking attack as the Goku for like the additional supers. And then you get to the point where you want to use their active skill. So after they've received 7 or more attacks or when HP is 50% or less. So you use the active skill, Piccolo does the special beam cannon, does some damage, and then you're replaced with the Piccolo, who has guard for 1 turn, and then he's stacking defense on his 12 key super. But normally what that means, or at least in my experience of using him, is you get that 1 big attack with the special beam cannon, and then if the event goes on many more turns after that, this guy just gets absolutely destroyed. I really did not like this unit on release. I did not have good experiences with them. Obviously with the Saiyan saga being not a huge thing at the time, their team options weren't exactly great. They were of course hurt by the fact that they were like the classic old school like joined forces type character or exchange character, where they suffer with these links and everything, because the card, if it was like Goku that exchanged into Piccolo, the card would have Goku links and categories and stuff to start with, which would be fine. But because they are Goku and Piccolo, they get this weird like link set and then selection of categories, which was just always the problem with joined forces characters. So these guys get a bit of an honourable mention just because for me, I really disliked this unit. I know some people do like them or did like them, so let me know what you think down below. They could get a decent easy A, I guess. Then we had a couple of people mention the AGL Krillin and Gohan. They released as Part 2 LRs for the worldwide celebration that had Namek, Goku and Full Power Frieza, who obviously were received as really, really good characters at the time. There was also the INT Vegeta exchange into Goku. I think both of these Part 2 LRs weren't particularly hyped up at the time. The Krillin and Gohan, again, suffering from that joined forces issue, right, with lacking categories and teams. Like Rapid Growth, when these guys first came out, was kind of a nothing team. And they just really weren't very good, right? Relying on like a medium chance to dodge. Maybe could get the extra attack. Then they would have the outfit change, and then they obviously got a little bit better. The one thing about them that was cool was that they had the active skill that you could use like twice, because you could use it in this first form, and then when they costume changed, you could use it again. But really all it did was give them 24 key, which I believe like that's all it does now. But at least with their post easy A, they gave them a ton of extra buffs with like the 24 key to make them a little bit better. So unfortunately, even with their easy A, these guys didn't become that crazy. Like the Namek team has never really gotten a solid amount of respect. These guys were not great on release. I think at the time I did prefer the Vegeta, which is why these guys get a mention in the video instead of him. But let me know your thoughts. Did you prefer these guys to the Vegeta, or what did you think of Krillin and Gohan? We also had a mention for the Trunks and Goten. However, I did want to say with these guys, they were not the craziest on release. Obviously, they were, when they first came out, not on like Fusion. Obviously, Fused Fighters didn't even exist when they came out, and then that was added in later. In fact, I'm not sure, were categories even out when these guys came out originally? I don't think they were, but these guys, the thing that was actually kind of useful, and shout out to Proton, mentioned this in the Twitter thread, but these guys were one of the best units for the STR Broly EZA, like the original STR Broly. I think he was like the second EZA that ever came out, and the weakness for his event was like AGL Hybrid Saiyans, which there really wasn't a huge amount of options for that at the time. So these guys ended up being one of the best units in the game to use for that particular event, because the first few EZA events that came out were actually quite hard. And so these guys were at least useful for that, but definitely weren't like a crazy like meta busting unit or anything. They got a somewhat decent EZA later on, but obviously are way past the point of being usable now. But let me know your thoughts. Were Trunks and Goten, do you think they should be on this list? Were they disappointing on release? Let me know your thoughts down below. And then lastly, we did have a mention from my boy AC, which I hadn't really thought of, because this guy, the INT Fusion Zamasu, I really liked him on release, just in terms of looking at his like full potential, but he didn't really have a great team like on release, right? He needed another Potara ally on the team, and at the time that he came out, there weren't a lot of like really good meta relevant Goku Black and Zamasu characters. He was the part 2 like Tanabata unit for the Vegeta and Trunks, but he wasn't necessarily a super good option on their team. He could potentially struggle for Ki without support and without like good link partners, but like he had some really good stuff in his kit. Like he could hit really hard for characters at the time. If he got his additional supers, he could build up to quite a good amount of defense. He did have the ability to nullify unarmed super attacks, which I think when he released there weren't loads of those going around in like the meta for the toughest bosses, but it was still a useful ability. But the biggest problem with this guy is, like I say, not only did he not have a bunch of relevant partners at the time, but then, you know, while he was, I guess, trying to desperately hang on to relevancy while we hoped for a new Goku Black or like a new setup for like a future team, then obviously we got the TEQ Fusion Zamasu for the worldwide in 2023, and he had the same name. So obviously for like global, this guy came out end of 2022. He maybe would have been able to hang on to some relevancy, maybe be like the 6th unit choice on the team for like the updated worldwide Zamasu team. But of course, as has been spoken about many times in the past, with them releasing the new TEQ Fusion Zamasu and not giving him a different name, despite him being the like half corrupted form, it meant that he had the same name as this guy. So this guy then essentially lost all chance of being an option for that team, really, unless you just had him as like a slot 3 floater. And so on release, he wasn't, I wouldn't say he was terrible, but he's just another unit, I guess, kind of like the Ginyu Force, where like his in-game performance, I wouldn't say was necessarily bad. It's just the fact that there was so little like relevant teams you could actually run him on where he could work his best. And so he gets an honorable mention here for this list. So that is going to be it for these ones. Like I say, if there are any that you think I missed out or that we should have mentioned who are terrible yellow coin LRs on release, do let me know down below. But as I said at the very beginning, hopefully this hasn't been a jinx, and we've gotten all of the bad stuff out of the way by revisiting all these bad yellow coin LRs, and hopefully that can funnel some positivity towards the part 2 LR that should hopefully now be revealed tomorrow. So make sure you guys hit that like button. The more likes we get on the video, more luck towards the part 2 LR actually being good. We will have to wait and see. But like I said, if there's any you think I should have put on this list, do let me know down below in the comment section who they are and why. And yeah, maybe we can do another one of these. I'm thinking about doing ones for EZAs as well in the future. Obviously, you know, AGL Bardock will be on there, so maybe you guys can let me know your thoughts on that in the comment section as well. So that is going to be it for the video, guys. This has been the Masked Ningen. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you are new, check out the links down below, and I will see you all again soon. Have a good one.